Why do people refuse to acknowledge that the first ancient Egyptians were black? Because they weren't. That's not to say that there were not black people in Egypt, there absolutely were. Egypt was not a black civilization, though, if we are applying our modern definition of the term, nor if we are determining this by what was the predominant racial makeup of their population. How do we know this? We can look at how the Egyptians depicted themselves versus absolutely black civilizations like Nubia. This is a picture of King Tut's sandals. Notice the very obviously black individuals on it. Those are Nubians. They appear on his sandals because they were the enemies of Egypt and the pharaoh walked on them to disrespect them. So it's pretty clear that to an Egyptian, someone who looks like this was different than them and depicted in a completely different way. Speaking of Nubia, they invaded and conquered Egypt at one point and established a royal dynasty, the Kushites. These pharaohs have always been regarded as black. They were also very obviously outside conquerors. Egyptians do not consider them to be Egyptian but rather part of the intermediate period. They fought to expel them and did. Don't get too comfortable with this, however, Eurocentrists and racists. It tells us that there absolutely were black people in Egypt and that they mixed with society and played a role in shaping it. It doesn't equate, however, to Egypt being a black civilization. DNA tells us that modern Egyptians have more in common genetically with sub-Saharan Africans than ancient ones did. Supporting evidence of DNA discovery unlocks secrets of ancient Egyptians. Researchers from the University of Tübingen and the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History in Jena, both in Germany, have decoded the genome of ancient Egyptians for the first time, with unexpected results. Publishing its findings in Nature Communications, the study concluded that preserved remains found in Abu Zar el-Melek, Middle Egypt, were closest genetic relatives of Neolithic and Bronze Age populations from the Near East, Anatolia and Eastern Mediterranean Europeans. Modern Egyptians, by comparison, share much more DNA with sub-Saharan populations. The findings have turned years of theory on its head, causing Egyptologists to re-evaluate the region's history while unlocking new tools for scientists working in the field. Correcting past errors. Depending on which way you see it, ancient Egyptians have the privilege or ignominy of being one of the most investigated peoples of antiquity. Scientists have virtually undressed mummies, diagnosed from beyond the grave, and exposed miscarriages and 3,000-year-old scams. Extracting genome data is a new frontier for Egyptologists, however. Scientists took 166 bone samples from 151 mummies, dating from approximately 1400 BC to AD 400, extracting DNA from 90 individuals and mapping the full genome in 3 cases. Previous DNA analysis of mummies has been treated with a necessary dose of skepticism, explains Professor Johannes Krauss of the Max Planck Institute. When you touch a bone, you probably leave more DNA on the bone than is inside it, he argued. Contamination is a big issue. Only in the last 5 or 6 years has it become possible to actually study DNA from ancient humans, because we can now show whether DNA is ancient or not by its chemical properties. Heat and high humidity in tombs, paired with some of the chemicals involved in mummification, all contribute to DNA degradation, the paper adds, but it describes its findings as the first reliable data set obtained from ancient Egyptians. Analyzing samples spanning over a millennium, researchers looked for genetic differences compared with Egyptians today. They found that the sample set showed a strong connection with a cluster of ancient non-African populations based east of the Mediterranean Sea. Krauss describes the far-reaching data set gained from looking at mitochondrial genomes. This is not just the DNA of one person. It's the DNA of the parents, grandparents, grandparents' parents, grand-grand-grandparents' parents, and so forth. So if we don't find sub-Saharan African ancestry in those people, that is pretty representative, at least for Middle Egypt. Krauss hypothesizes that ancient northern Egypt would be much the same, if not more, linked to the Near East. Ancient southern Egypt might be a different matter, however, where populations lived closer to Nubia, home of the Black Pharaohs, in what is now Sudan. Historical conquests. The genetics of the Abu Sir el-Melek community did not undergo any major shifts during the 1,300-year time span we studied, said Wolfgang Hack, group leader at the Max Planck Institute. This period covered the rule of Alexander the Great, 332 to 323 BC, the Ptolemaic dynasty, 323 to 30 BC, and part of Roman rule, 30 BC to AD 641. Strict social structures and legal incentives to marry along ethnic lines within these communities may have played a part in the Egyptians' genetic stasis, the paper speculates. A lot of people has assumed foreign invaders brought a lot of genetic ancestry into the region, Krauss said. People expected that through time Egypt would become more European, but we see the exact opposite. Modern Egyptians were found to inherit 8% more ancestry from African ancestors than the mummies studied. The paper cites increased mobility along the Nile, increased long-distance commerce and the era of the trans-Saharan slave trade as potential reasons why. The team's findings do come with one obvious caveat: all our genetic data was obtained from a single site in Middle Egypt and may not be representative for all of ancient Egypt, the paper concedes. While the study might be limited in scope, the team believes it has made some technical breakthroughs. I expect there will be a ton of ancient Egyptian mummy genomes mapped in the next couple of years, Krauss said, adding that multiple groups are following his team's lead. There's always more research we can do. This is not the end. It's just the beginning. So let's consider that ancient Egypt existed as a culture for almost 3,000 years. It was a large place with a large number of people living there. So when we talk about the Egyptians, the question always needs to be asked: which ones, when, and where? Egyptian was invaded by Nubians, Persians, the Sea Peoples, the Lebu, the Hyksos, the Greeks, and finally the Romans. They all left their mark, particularly in different areas. Alexandria to this day has a Greek-speaking community. But the civilization itself was created by and numerically dominated by people who look largely like modern-day Coptic people in Egypt. They very clearly depicted themselves this way in the image below from the Book of Gates. Notice the difference between the Egyptian on the far right and the preceding Libyan, Nubian, and Canaanite. Afrocentrists need to abandon the Egyptian fixation and focus on the many other fascinating civilizations that came out of ancient Africa that were black. There's obviously Nubia, Punt, the Mali Empire, Great Zimbabwe, etc. In the decades people have been trying to prove this myth of Black Egypt, the public could have been educated about so much other fascinating and important African history. Please press the like button if you believe this video informative. You may also text the name of the country you're watching this video from. Also please subscribe to this channel, we greatly appreciate it. It will surely grow our channel, and thanks for watching.